Hi, I'm Mike Papantonio, and this is Ring of Fire. On today's show, we'll tell you how the lobbyists have found a way to influence government policies from inside the government itself. In Wall Street, bankers are stealing billions of dollars from cities and states every year, and we'll tell you how that scheme is bankrupting America one city at a time. And the insurance industry is gouging doctors with absurd premiums and laying the blame on the legal system. We'll tell you why that claim is completely false. We'll have all that and more coming up. And right now, you've just entered the Ring of Fire.
You can't change Washington from the inside. You can only change it from the outside.
Grand jury secrecy rules.
For political gain.
The press can find out.
That has nothing to do with politics, but go ahead.
It wouldn't bother me.
Oops.
For decades, lobbyists have helped influence politicians with corporate money, but now they've found an even better way to deliver for corporate America by getting appointed to high-ranking positions. That's within the administration most of the time. Joining me now to talk about this are attorneys Howard Nations and Dave TeSelle. Howard, you know, we used to see the idea of revolving door where we would actually have somebody moving from industry and then they would move maybe into the public sector, and that was one way we saw revolving door. And then we'd see them moving from the public sector, the private sector, into the public sector. So it goes both ways. And what we're seeing now more, I think, and I don't know, I want both of your opinions on this, but what we're seeing now is this new form of imposing the will of corporations by a person who on day one had worked with a corporation, and on day two they're working inside the administration, changing laws inside. Howard, aren't you seeing that as a huge new developing problem, even more so than we saw even 10 years ago?
Well, it's definitely true, Mike, and as usual, not unusual at all, Dick Cheney is the poster boy for this type of situation where when he was nominated for vice president, in his initial report he made the financial disclosures that his income from Halliburton was $6.4 million in compensation. On May 15th, after he took office, he reported that his income from Halliburton was $35.1 million. He then proceeded to spend 8 years of billions of dollars of taxpayer money going in no-bid contracts to Halliburton. Big surprise.
So, Dave, what we see happening is the way that I see this new revolving door. As I say, it revolves in two directions, but the new revolving door that we're seeing more of, I guess is the best way to put it, is where an employee's working with a corporation. They've been there 10 years. They say, you know, we're going to give you a bonus if you can seat yourself somewhere inside government to where you can have an impact on laws inside the administration, and they give them huge bonuses if they can get a job like that. Don't you see that happening more and more?
Mike, this is just shameless. It's almost unbelievable. One of the best examples that we've seen is Jack Lew, the Treasury Secretary, under Obama. It just came out that in 2009, when he left to become part of the Obama administration, he was paid a $1 million bonus by Citigroup for taking that position. And Citigroup is not the only large big business that's doing this. There's at least 8 large companies on Wall Street that pay bonuses to employees who are leaving their employment if they go into government. Usually bonuses are paid in business in order to reward work and keep good employees long term. Now, shamelessly, they're paying for access and influence into the government up front by paying bonuses when they leave to go to government.
Howard, aren't they actually enticing some of their employees that they feel have the chance to make the leap into government inside the administration or inside some regulatory agency? Aren't they actually enticing their employees to make that move by telling them that, gee whiz, if you do that, you're going to be able to draw down on your pension program immediately. We're going to go ahead and give you all kinds of money that you wouldn't have been able to get immediately. And we encourage you to do this thing they call become the public servant. Well, really what it is, it's the corporate servant, isn't it, Howard? Isn't that what this is all about?
Well, if you look at the jobs they're going into, primarily they're going into jobs as staffers with Congress. Staff members in Congress are extremely important. They're important in two regards. You have legislative staff members they work directly for the congressman, but then you have committee staff members who are generally hired by the chairman of the committee. They have tremendous influence on everything that takes place before the committee. So what they're doing is they're hiring not just members of the corporation, they're hiring lobbyists. Lobbyists, this is amazing. Lobbyists for corporations are being hired to go into jobs as staff members of Congress, exercising extreme influence.
Dave, one story that hit the news that I think maybe is maybe even corporate media reported a little bit, but they, for the most part, ignored the story, and that's the Northrop Grumman story. Lay that out for us a little bit. What happened with this very ugly little history that tells the story about what's happening to our government?
Well, this is just amazing. I mean, we have seen exactly what Howard was just talking about, where lobbyists are going into Congress and being paid large bonuses before they become staffers. Now, Northrop Grumman, in the Global Hawk program, was trying to sell a new program to the United States government to replace the U-2 manned surveillance program, which works perfectly fine.
Yeah, I mean, there's never been a complaint. Matter of fact,
there's never been a complaint.
The military said we don't need this new thing that you're trying to sell us, right?
The military said we need to cut back, and this is where we can cut back. We don't need this unmanned spacecraft. But Northrop Grumman, in a multi-billion-dollar industry, and to make sure that they made money, they made sure their lobbyists got to become staffers in Congress and made sure to fight this, and now are using this program to attack Obama, saying this is President Obama trying to cut back on the military against our will, when really the military doesn't want this program.
Yeah, the Global Hawk saga, again, you start off with the military saying, no, we don't even need this thing. You're wasting money by doing it. And then the next thing we see lobbyists that are working with people like Jim Inhofe, you know, who has this incredibly close relationship with the arms industry. We see their lobbyists showing up, and the way they're showing up is they're leaving Grumman, they're leaving Northrop Grumman. Northrop Grumman is saying, hey, on your way out, by the way, why don't we give you an extra $400,000 just because you've been such a good employee? And oh, by the way, when you get over there to Jim Inhofe's shop there, and when Jim Inhofe tries to sell the American public on this new thing called the Global Hawk, make sure you make it happen. Howard, isn't that basically how we see it happening with all the industry right now?
That's how we're seeing it happen across the board, Mike. And we're seeing, you have to stop and think of the simple common sense of this. And this is not just the Republicans in this case doing this. For example, in 2008, David Crone, who was the chief lobbyist for Comcast, was paid $2.9 million. Now think about this. Comcast paid him $2.9 million and then paid off a $1.2 million condo that he had in Philadelphia in order for him to go in and take a job at a $170,000 a year salary as chief of staff of Harry Reid. Now, why is that so important? The chief of staff is the gatekeeper. They're the people that exercise an unbelievable amount of influence on who gets to talk to, who gets access to the congressman, on all sorts of legislation. It's a huge job. But it pays $170,000 a year. Why do you give up something that's paying you $2 million a year for $170,000 a year?
Howard, isn't the rest of that story, or David, let me just ask you this. I think you talked about this last program. Isn't part of that story is here you have Comcast, obviously MSNBC, they're the media. So why would the media, corporate media, report a story like this? Why would corporate media talk about that revolving door that takes place between the lobbyist and the public sector and the private sector? Why would Comcast have any interest in it going on the nightly news and saying, oh, by the way, the people that we just sent over to government to work as government workers used to work with us, and we gave them a huge bonus before they left. Why would Comcast ever do that kind of reporting?
Absolutely. They're not going to do that. I mean, this is the huge conflict of interest. And what's amazing is that we tried to pass, Congress talked about the Stock Act and passing an act to be able to actually track this type of disclosure, that when employees would come into Congress, they would have to disclose those kinds of benefits that they got. And one of the major improvements in the disclosures was that the Stock Act would require an easy-to-use online database so that the American public and so that people beyond the mainstream media, other outlets that actually try to uncover these types of stories, could actually find out about this. And what did they do most recently? Very quietly, without being reported, again, Mike, by the mainstream media, by Comcast, what they did was they removed that from the bill. They removed the ability in the middle of the night.
Signs off on it in the middle of the night, and the media doesn't do any reporting, because the people who benefit from this really just as big as the defense contractors, Howard. I know you'll agree. If you take a look at these stories dealing with the media, corporate media, buddy, they are loading up government regulatory agencies. Now the new load up is in telecom, isn't it, Howard? Isn't that another area where we're seeing them double down on their effort to change democracy by just paying people off directly and indirectly?
Well, in telecommunications, they have so many lobbyists who became staff members in Congress, and who are taking other jobs in Congress so they can make sure that everything they want passed gets passed. And that's what's happening across the board with the biggest lobbyist. And if there's major legislation pending, or if legislation has just been passed that they want to repeal, you will find these people going into they're loading up. They load up the committees, they load up the congressmen that are in charge of either passing that legislation or trying to repeal that legislation.
And Dave, if you're waiting for a story to be heard on the nightly news about this actually happening, wouldn't you tell people to listen very closely, because they won't hear it?
They won't hear it. I mean, this is common sense. Howard said this before, but it needs to be emphasized. Why would someone leave a job on K Street making $1 million, $2 million, $3 million a year?
To work for the government for $170,000.
Exactly.
Hey guys, thanks a lot. It's a story we'll continue talking about because nobody else seems to be interested in talking about it. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just ahead, we'll take a look at how the Roberts Court always delivers for big business. We'll be right back with more Ring of Fire.
You're watching Free Speech TV, a network powered by the people.
Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. American consumers are losing the fight for justice in America. It's just that simple. Corporations have a stranglehold on our judiciary, and nowhere is it more apparent than the U.S. Supreme Court. Joining me now to talk about this is attorney Niall McCarthy. Neil, the studies are very clear. This Roberts Court is one of the most conservative courts that we've seen since the Depression. And if they continue the rulings they're making, a lot of the things that they're going to do may just launch us back into that type of economy. What's your take on this Roberts Court? There's been so little reporting about exactly what corporatist this court really has become.
Well, I think what we're seeing here is we're seeing a shift from the Supreme Court as an independent branch to really just a political arm. And on the corporate side, it's a great example of how the Supreme Court is changing policy in the United States without any oversight, without any review by Congress. On the corporate side, the Roberts Court is the friendliest group to corporations in the last 50 years. And the shame here, Mike, is that when the Supreme Court makes a decision, as you know, that's basically the end of the game. There's no real way to change that, and they're doing it in ways that really harm everyday average Americans.
You know, Neil, the unfortunate thing is the typical consumer in the country doesn't really pay attention to the Supreme Court unless it's a big social issue. For example, cultural or social change that's taking place, maybe gender equality, maybe women's rights, maybe racial equality. They pay attention to those big cases, but what ends up happening in between is a series of corporate help kind of cases where corporate America comes in, Chamber of Commerce comes in behind them, and they get this Supreme Court to rule for the corporations almost, last number I saw, was approaching 100% of the time. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, I think, is at a 100% success rate in front of this court just in this last, since the last cycle. So do you see a problem there that we look at a court and we say, well, this is a socially progressive court, but when you take a look at what they're doing to consumers, it's a very different story, isn't it?
Oh, it's a massive problem, because when you go through the congressional process, you come out with bills that are moderate. There's moderation involved. There's a watered-down bill. That's the ultimate result. In the Supreme Court, you have the Chamber of Commerce advancing an agenda which it has been unsuccessful with in Congress. So they go to the Supreme Court, and these are not headline-grabbing cases. You know, this is not Bush v. Gore. But when you have cases that limit the rights of consumers to get redress for employment violations, for sexual harassment, when it limits their rights to see a jury, there's a tremendous impact on citizens, and it's an impact, frankly, that's not being reported.
One part of the problem, isn't it, that the story's never really told about what happened. I think of the last cases that have come out dealing with class actions in the United States. The average consumer, first of all, they don't think it affects them. Second of all, that nobody pays attention to it. And third of all, it allows corporate America to victimize consumers without any type of avenue left for the consumers. Tell us about the trend that you've seen the Roberts Court on, where it comes to really victimizing consumers to the benefit of corporate America.
Well, the cases you're referring to are the AT&T case, the Walmart case, and the Comcast case. And often, corporate America rips off consumers at $50, $100, $200, because they know that a consumer can write as many letters as they want. They're not going to get a result. They can't bring a case like that individually. It's cost prohibitive. So the only avenue is a class action. And what we've seen from these recent Supreme Court decisions is that the barrier to bring a class action gets higher and higher. The Roberts Court has ignored decades and decades of precedent that allowed class actions to go forward to redress individual harm to consumers. And they've made it not quite impossible, but incredibly difficult to bring a class action. And the person who's getting hammered by that is the average American.
Well, it allows a corporation to do whatever they want to do to consumers without really any fear of getting penalized by it. The operations don't change at all, and so you may have a company like Verizon or whatever the company is, Comcast, whoever, that is taking advantage of the consumers, as you point out, $50 here, $100 there. That individual consumer can't sue Comcast because the cost to bring the lawsuit would be $100,000 to get back the $100 they lost. So the class action was the avenue. The Roberts Court has made it very clear that they're siding with corporate America because corporate America realizes that if they can do away with class actions, then consumers really don't have any avenue left open to them, do they? You can't bring individual cases.
No, when the class actions go, the consumer rights go. And what we're really talking about here is circumventing responsibility. The Roberts Court has allowed corporations to get a free pass. So they can go through and they can rip off people, $100, $200 at a time, and there's absolutely no accountability. And the concern here is that the Chamber of Commerce couldn't get that kind of reform in Congress. So what they've done quite cleverly is decide to go to the Supreme Court, and they're not doing it all at once. They're just chipping away piece by piece at consumers' rights. And every time they try to do that, the Roberts Court rules in their favor.
Well, okay, so right now, here's what we know, Neil. I mean, right now, it's not just one study, but it's many studies that have gone back where you have economists, you have college professors, law school professors, you have experienced public servant people coming from the public service entities that are looking at this court, and they're saying we've gone back to the 1930s and we have compared all of the courts in between, and without exception, I don't think there's been any one of the studies that is taken with exception with the idea that if it's a corporate right, the Roberts Court is always going to side with the corporation to the detriment of the consumer. Now, the other part of this is we don't there. Once it happens there, it's over, right? I mean, you hit the Supreme Court, and unless you have legislation that changes what that Supreme Court does, the consumer has to live with it. Much like Citizens United. We were hit with Citizens United. It turned democracy upside down, but there's no way, there's no recourse beyond the U.S. Supreme Court. They actually have more power than the Congress, more power than the President, more power than all of our branches together, but there is no redress, is there?
There's not, which makes this the most insidious part of this, is that it's game over. So once a consumer loses its rights in the Supreme Court, they're gone forever. I mean, there's very rare cases where Congress will act to reverse a Supreme Court decision. That's incredibly rare. So again, what corporations have done very brightly is focus in an area where they're winning, and it's not reversible.
But wasn't that part of the program? If you really think back, if you go back and look at the FDR years, Franklin Delano Roosevelt faced the same problem. He was trying to pass legislation. Every time he would pass legislation that helped the consumer, the Supreme Court would then take that away. And FDR said, well, okay, you continue to play that game. I'm going to play a new game. I'm going to have new, we're going to increase the number of the U.S. Supreme Court, and we're going to nullify your vote. And that's really what it took for the Supreme Court to become responsible to consumers again. I mean, it was fairly extreme conduct on the part of the president back then, wasn't it?
No, absolutely, but you don't have that type of oversight now. So you have a Supreme Court right now that's given free rein, and they know it. So they know when they make a decision, no one's going to check it. You're not going to have another court packing proposal, and they're there for life.
Don't you see something, Neil, don't you see something different here too? Do you ever remember having a Supreme Court justice like Scalia, for example, or Thomas, out giving speeches where they're critical of the president or they're critical of Congress, and they're actually telling the American public what's on their mind before the issue is even in front of the Supreme Court? But we're seeing this big mouth, this big bag of wind, Scalia, for example, out there almost every week, playing politics rather than being a judge. That's a different thing. We haven't seen that historically, have we?
We've seen nothing like that in U.S. history, and Scalia is probably the best example. Scalia goes out and gives speeches to conservative groups. He goes to universities, and you know exactly how he's going to rule on a case before the case ever comes up. And the sad part about this is, as a result of the conduct of Scalia and Roberts and their cronies, the Supreme Court has lost some of its prestige.
Yeah, talk about that. Talk about that a little bit. What have you just seen? You've been practicing several decades now. What have you seen as far as the way that the Supreme Court has been regarded by the American public? I mean, they're plummeting as far as public opinion, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, they're just looked at as lobbyists now. If you talk to the average American, your client, what they say is the Supreme Court is becoming a laughingstock, because you know what the votes are going to be before the issue comes to the Supreme Court. So you look at their tendencies, you look at what they've said publicly, as you mentioned, and it's not an objective assessment of who's right or who's wrong. It's a review of ideology. I'm to the right, I'm voting to the right on this issue. There is no chance I'm going to vote against a corporation. and it's somewhat of it's become a farce.
Yeah, and now, Neil, with these new studies, I can't emphasize these studies enough. They're just extremely important in what we found in these new studies. But now we see that the empirical data shows it. I mean, we're not guessing anymore. The empirical data says that this court is so owned and operated by corporate America that a consumer has little or no chance. Now, let me add one other thing. Talk about this. We've got about a minute left. We think as progressives that a Kagan or Sotomayor, that they're going to be good for consumers because they're good on social issues. But truthfully, these are justices that come from corporate America. They worked as corporate lawyers before they came onto the court. Isn't that an effect here too?
Well, yeah, certainly they're not. Someone who was predisposed to be liberal on the social side is not necessarily predisposed to be liberal on the corporate side. Although with the justices you mentioned, you got a heck of a lot better to the shot than you have with the other 5, where it's game over before you open your mouth.
But sometimes what we do is we miss the idea that these people, and these are Obama appointments, and not just at the Supreme Court level, but we see those Obama appointments even at the federal level. They're silk-stocking lawyers. They work for the biggest corporate defense firms in the country, and then we expect them to put a black robe on, and then somehow now they're going to care about the consumer. If you look at what's happening, look at these studies that are coming out, the studies are showing that's absolutely wrong. We're kidding ourselves if we think that there's any truth to that. Neil McCarthy, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Michael.
Up next, we'll take a look at how the insurance industry is ripping off doctors and blaming victims, malpractice victims, for price gouging. I'm Mike Papantonio, and you're watching Ring of Fire. We'll be right back. Hi, I'm Mike Papantonio, host of Ring of Fire on Free Speech TV. The corporate-controlled media rakes in millions of dollars in profit every year by telling you only part of the story. They're at the mercy of their corporate sponsors, and they refuse to take on corporations that defraud, kill, maim, and harm consumers. So for every 3 hours of conservative talk on the air, there's only about 6 minutes of honest progressive talk. To make matters worse, court rulings have told us that the media outlets can legally distort or censor news at their whim. You see, FCC guidelines for honest reporting aren't actually the laws in the United States. In short, the media is legally allowed to lie and to hide the truth from American citizens, even when public health and safety are at stake. The problem is that when you have media outlets owned by corporate interest, every talking point delivered by that network is going to be to the benefit of those corporate interests. Here at Free Speech TV, we don't have shareholders. We don't have to answer to corporate America, and we don't pull any punches because of that. Our loyalty is to the viewers, and our viewers are the ones that help keep Free Speech TV alive. You do that. We need your help. We need your donations to make sure that we continue to deliver what you want and need, and that is the truth. Free Speech TV doesn't take corporate money, and that's why your financial support is so important to us. Viewer voices fuel Free Speech TV and drive many of the program decisions. Your support helps keep information flowing. It helps hold things together. We can hold corporate media accountable only if we have a voice to do that. And right now, Free Speech TV is one of the few voices out there that is going to tell the story regardless of what corporate America wants us to say. I'm Mike Papantonio, and I'll be with you every week telling you the truth that you will not hear on corporate media. Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. Medical malpractice insurance premiums for doctors have skyrocketed in past years, and the industry wants us to believe that it's because of malpractice suits. This couldn't be further from the truth, and I have Linda Lipsen from the AAJ with me now to tell us why the claim is completely bogus. Linda, the insurance industry, together with the Chamber of Commerce, has done it again. They have fleeced the American public. This big scam had to do with the medical malpractice insurance crisis that was completely fabricated, created by the industry itself to where they could charge doctors more money and then make the American public believe that there was some kind of big medical malpractice crisis. You lobbied on behalf of consumers on this issue. Let's talk about it a little bit. Tell me where this story begins.
Well, the story begins the story begins really at the door of the insurance industry. What they've done is they've convinced legislators throughout the country, whether they be federal legislators or state legislators, that they're crying poor me, and what they're saying that needs to happen is that individuals need to have their rights eliminated or curtailed. And the reality is quite different. The group that is doing the best in our economy are the medical malpractice insurers. They're the top of the Fortune 500 companies. Their profits are at record levels.
Linda, one problem with the insurance scam is that people don't understand that the insurance company takes money and they invest the premium dollars that they get from a doctor, for example, that pays premiums. They put that into the market. They put in CDOs and swaps and synthetics and all of those things that caused a financial burn down. Now, when things go bad, the insurance industry then comes back and says, gee whiz, we have to raise money. So how do they raise the money?
Right. They also, over-report their losses and they under-report their profits. So if any other business acted this way, we would say it was a scam. And the folks that are really in the dark are the doctors and the hospitals, because what they do is they want to blame it on the lawyers, when it really is they should really focus on the insurance industry. The insurance industry makes it so complicated, using all kinds of technical terms, that they just shrug their shoulders and they can't focus enough on the insurance industry, and they go back and try to get laws passed.
Well, Linda, isn't part of the problem, they actually end up, not just the lawyers, they blame it on the patients. For some reason, the people who suffer through medical malpractice, all of a sudden they're having to pay for this because there's these draconian laws that are passed, and those draconian laws keep people from going to court and recovering when the doctors cut off the wrong arm or the wrong leg or they left them blind. And so the American public believes that it's medical cases that are causing the insurance industry to have to raise prices, but really it's because the insurance industry has made bad investments. They've taken their premium money and they've put it in the market and they've made bad investments. And then you mentioned also that they play games with what they actually report. How do they go about hiding how much they're really having to pay out?
Well, because they guess. Every year they guess how much money they're going to need to pay out their supposed losses. But the problem is that before the losses occur, they over-report the potential losses, and then they have these huge reserves. And one insurance executive recently said, it's just like printing money. Well,
let me ask you that about a reserve. What they do, it isn't the way it works. At the first of the year, the company's able to say, we believe that we're going to have to pay $10 million for claims, so we're going to take a fund and set up a special fund, and we're going to call it a reserve fund. And then that reserve fund, they don't pay any taxes on the reserve fund, do they? They get interest payments and don't pay taxes on it. And at the end, they may only have to pay out $3 million, but they still made money on that reserve fund.
That's exactly right. You've said it exactly right. And then at the same time, then they go from state to state and try to get laws passed that make it very difficult for injured and killed Americans who happen to get an infection in a hospital, happen to have the wrong leg removed, etc. They go state by state and try to limit their remedies, their recourse. And for those people, what we really should be doing is we should be turning our attention on those folks and make it safe for folks. That's how you actually help people rather than eliminate their rights.
Let me ask you this: how do these insurance companies that come up with these medical malpractice premium insurance scams, how does their company compare typically to the Fortune 500 companies out there?
They're the top of the top of the top. they're the top 50 of the Fortune 500. You know, when you have you have these companies that are making 49% return on investment, you wonder, like, what in the world is this? Again, insurance executive recently said they're just like printing money, and the reason why the federal government doesn't really look into the business of insurance because of what happened in the 40s. In the 40s, I think it was 1945, 1946. Two gentlemen, McCarran and Ferguson, went to Congress basically in the middle of the night as these things get done, and they said, well, the business of insurance should not be subject to the antitrust laws.
Well, I mean, was there any logic to the only other industry that I can think of is the baseball industry that they so baseball, they don't have to follow the same laws as everybody else. And you're telling me the insurance industry doesn't have to follow the same antitrust laws as the rest of the world. Is that basically it?
And then they went to the federal trade. Then they also got a bill passed that said that the Federal Trade Commission can't even study the business of insurance. So, you know, there is a long history in this country of not really evaluating what the insurance industry is doing and whether or not they're benefiting consumers. Now, outside of transportation and housing, insurance is the third biggest consumer expenditure. Yet, nobody, you know, there's not a lot of active and consistent monitoring of these excessive profits, and it really is to the detriment of patients and also to the detriment of doctors and to hospitals as well, because they're not getting the benefit. There's only one, to my knowledge, there's only one example of a state that passed what they call tort reform that also passed insurance regulation. And when they passed insurance regulation, that was the only time that insurers were required to give money back to the consumers that were the doctors and the hospitals.
But Linda, what they've been able to do, they've been able to convince the American public that if one of their neighbors, for example, loses a leg because of malpractice, and this person happens to be sitting on a jury and they have to judge their neighbor, they've been so terrified by this whole scam of medical malpractice that they're liable to tell that man, sure, the doctor cut off the wrong leg, but you can't recover. Wasn't that part of the whole plan here, was to create to cry wolf and to scare the hell out of everybody to where we were even unwilling to take care of our neighbors where it came to serving appropriately on a jury?
That's right. It casts doubt on your neighbors, and all your neighbors want, they just want to be cared for, and they want a safe place to be cared for. And you know, there should be I think that medical malpractice is the 6th leading cause of death in America. We should be outraged about that. Everyone should be rolling up their sleeves and figuring out, let's make it safer. Let's prevent the accident, the injury from happening in the first place. And I think that the doctors, the hospitals, the patients, the lawyers, everyone can agree on that. The insurance companies might not, but I think this debate has got to be less about eliminating rights and more about patient safety.
But unfortunately, what they've done is they've turned the doctors believing that, gee whiz, it's patients' fault that premiums are going up, when in fact, the money is just being tucked away on Wall Street. However they want to do it, they run the scam of the day. They then scare the hell out of everybody and make them think there's some kind of crisis. It seems to be a cycle that goes on and on. Linda Lipsen is the CEO of the American Association for Justice. Linda, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Mike.
Coming up, we'll take a look at how Wall Street bankers are stealing billions of dollars from city governments all over America every day. I'm Mike Papantonio. We'll be right back with more Ring of Fire. You're witness to a political coup taking place right in front of your damn eyes. That caliber of evil needed to be held accountable in courtrooms. Billionaire mad money wasn't enough to buy democracy. Legislators don't have enough sense to think for themselves. They let Alec do it. Here at Ring of Fire, the truth is our only agenda, so we're able to bring you the stories that mainstream media just ignored or completely got wrong. Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. City governments all over the country are facing a severe budget crisis thanks to sequester. To make things worse, greedy Wall Street bankers have been scamming cities and states of billions of dollars every year. I have securities attorney James Kauffman here to explain what's happening. James, you have municipalities and state governments and school organizations basically almost on the edge of going out of business in a lot of places around the country. And it has to do not with too many employees. It doesn't have to do with too good of a union deal that they've gotten. It doesn't have to do with pension programs. It has to do with thieves on Wall Street basically hustling the municipality out of their money. How does it work?
Well, the way it works, Pap, is that the municipality, hospital district, or school board, when they want to have a new program, they need to borrow money. And the way that they borrow money is they issue a bond. And the bond is debt that the municipality has to pay to the bondholder. So the municipality pays the debt either on a fixed rate of interest or a variable rate of interest.
Okay, and how have the banks used that difference to hustle the municipalities in the last 10 years to where some of these folks are really on the edge of going out of business?
Well, one way is the way that they set the rates. The Wall Street can set the rates and have been manipulating the rates to either be up or down depending on what serves them. But what Wall Street will do is manipulate the rates, charge excessive fees, put in these agreements called swaps that are very, very difficult to get out of and cost a lot of money to get out of.
Okay, what is a typical situation of a municipality that has issued bonds to raise money? They've been sold this idea of a swap, and now they find out that the swap was a very bad idea because they can't even afford the interest rate. How do they get out of this terrible deal?
Well, the only way to really get out of the deal is to pay what they call the swap termination fee. There's it's an agreement, and it has a termination fee that is many times hundreds of millions of dollars. That is a penalty fee, and the only way to get out for the municipality is to pay Wall Street and to pay the bank hundreds of millions of dollars to terminate the swap.
Okay, so the municipality, your government right there in your little hometown, they've issued a bond because they want to build a new park or they wanted to build a new bridge, whatever it might be.
Sure.
They've made a deal with the bank. The bank has given them this thing that looks like a terrific, a perfect kind of deal. But in the fine print, they say, if interest rates change, you're the one that's going to have to suffer by paying an exorbitant penalty simply to get out of this deal. Is that basically it?
That's basically it. They are locked in because the Wall Street structures these deals so that if the rates move, if the rates go in a bad direction for the municipality, they're stuck.
Well now think about this. You have the municipality that as long as they have all the facts, as long as they're told the truth about how rates, for example, are going to be set,
yes,
then they can make an intelligent deal. But in the back rooms, what they don't tell the municipality is there is a conspiracy of sorts to set a rate according to what all the big banks want to set. It's a scam the big banks use, and that scam is called LIBOR, correct?
That's right. That's right. The scam is LIBOR, and LIBOR is 16 major banks that get together and decide what the rate's going to be. And when they talk to each other, they can decide to either put the rate up, put the rate down, and they look and they make that rate to their advantage. They manipulate the rate so that they get paid what they need to get paid from the municipality, and the municipality is stuck, and they don't know that it's being manipulated.
How is that not a fraud crime? How is that not antitrust? How is it not that the municipality can't sue the bank, that on day one the bank was telling them, look, go ahead and base your bond that you want to sell to build that new bridge on what we're telling you, because we're telling you all the truth, we're telling you all the facts, and in fact, they're lying from day one because they know they're going to hustle that municipality in the back rooms of the bank by setting a rate that nobody can afford, right? Or it's either going to be high or it's going to be low, and it's going to be to the detriment of the very people that they made that deal with, the municipality.
That's right, and it is fraud, and it should be prosecuted. It's not being prosecuted right now in this country. We need to be bringing cases. I do bring cases on behalf of municipalities for the exact fraud that you're describing. They were not told the backroom deal, and they wound up in a bond with a bad swap, and they wound up having to pay this exorbitant rate to get out, and they did. And those are the cases
James,
that we're looking at.
what's happening here, though, is the media that reports on these municipalities going out of business almost. You know, you hear about California, New York, some of these places that you would never want to buy a bond. Matter of fact, most people who buy bonds say, no, you don't buy them in New York, and you don't buy them in in municipalities in California, because it's a bad, risky deal. But what we're not being told by the media is that it doesn't have to do with too many employees. It doesn't have to do with unionization of the employees. It doesn't have to do with the fact that we have to pay a school teacher or a policeman or a firefighter a reasonable wage. It has to do with the thieves on Wall Street have engaged in this LIBOR hustle. And now, if I hear the story right, a federal judge has said they can get away with doing that. Did I get that right?
No, you got that right. There was an antitrust case against the 16 banks that I mentioned, and there's a federal judge in New York who said there's no antitrust violation on the LIBOR scheme. Even though there have been criminal activities, there have been pleas, there have been fines paid by Barclays and by other banks, mostly European banks, but all of them have admitted to fixing LIBOR. They've admitted this conduct, and yet you still have a problem, and you have judges who don't let these municipalities go after them.
James, talk a little bit about the refund transit study. I think it kind of tells the story in a simple way. It talks about here you have a transit study that was performed. They tried to figure out what kind of lies did the bank tell them and what happened as a result of those lies.
Well, what the regional transit study found was that there were billions of dollars that were being robbed out of the municipalities, and there were a lot of projects such as the Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority for their subway system, and each year they found that just Massachusetts was losing about $30 million a year just from the bad deals that they were in, and just on the basis of the swaps. They found that it was widespread. They found that it wasn't just Massachusetts, it was also New York. New York is somewhere in the neighborhood of $113 million annually. That's per year, losing money because of the bad deals that they're in with Wall Street. It's widespread.
If you're a mom and pop investor, James, and you said, you know, the stock market scares me to death based on what I saw happen last time. The stock market is based on, you know, the very underlying of the stock market in the last decade has been based on complete fraud. And so I don't want to be involved in the stock market, so I'm going to take my money to put them in municipal bonds, tax-free municipal bonds. What would you tell that person based on the way that we see Goldman Sachs and the way we see J.P. Morgan Chase and UBS and Wells Fargo, the way we see them hustle even this market with municipalities? How are people ever safe even with a tax-free bond?
Well, there's nowhere to be safe with these Wall Street banks and these Wall Street crooks. If you can imagine that Wall Street is taking advantage of our municipalities, which they are, they're taking advantage of mom and pop investors just alongside those municipalities. It is impossible to trust these Wall Street banks. It is impossible to understand and to give them your trust and trust them that the bonds that you're buying from them are good bonds and that they're not, some type of crazy structured finance product that they had years ago. They marketed all kinds of crap to different investors, mom and pop. They've been doing it for years. It's very difficult to trust them.
Okay, so isn't this kind of up to the Attorney General in particular states to actually do something, James? I saw the story in Oregon, and you had the Oregon Working Families Party, and together with unions, together with 5 or 6 major groups in Oregon, say to the Attorney General, why in the hell don't you sue these banks and get our money back? Why is it that we only have certain attorney generals that even are willing to fight on behalf of their consumers?
We only have certain attorney generals that are willing to take the stand against Wall Street. There's a lot of attorney generals who raise campaign funds through Wall Street, and that's an issue for them. Oregon is a shining example, but Oregon came about because of the Oregon Working Families Party that you discussed. If they had not banged on the doors of the Attorney General there, that would not have been brought by the Attorney General in Oregon, and they wouldn't have recovered. I think it's they found that they lost at least $110 million based on the scandal. It's not happening, and it's not happening for political reasons.
Okay, so you at the very top of it, you have an Attorney General who says, no, some of these banks are just too big to jail. We can't throw them in jail because they're so big. So you say, okay, well, surely at the state level, there's going to be somebody with enough guts to do something. But historically, if you look around the United States, you don't see attorney generals. Like Oregon is a great example. I mean, Oregon, it should have been an easy case to go forward and prove, but even that attorney general didn't have the guts or the interest in going after the banks because, as you point out, the banks are paying him so damn much money for his campaign.
That's right.
So I guess in about 30 seconds, tell me, if you're a mom and pop investor, how do you take this? What do you do with this information? About 20 seconds.
Well, if you're a mom and pop investor, what you do is you have to be very, very careful with your investments, and really you can't trust what Wall Street and what the financial system tells you is the truth. You have to look deeper, you have to ask for help, and you have to look at the bigger picture. Don't trust.
It is self-help, isn't it, James?
It is.
You honestly have to get online and you have to figure out what are the backstories to all of these scams before you understand. James Kauffman, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's Ring of Fire, but you can keep up with us throughout the week online at ringofireradio.com, on Twitter at Ring of Fire Radio, and on Facebook. I'm Mike Papantonio, and we'll see you next week right here on Ring of Fire.